The human Third Fleet materialized from hyperspace in a formation that should have been impossible. 16 warships dropped into normal space in perfect attack positions, their targeting systems already locked onto specific points in the Zephyrian fleet arrangement. Admiral Ryan Hayes aboard the UHS Defiant had somehow calculated the exact coordinates and timing needed to exploit a vulnerability that existed for only 17 seconds during formation transitions. Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display with growing horror. The human fleet had not arrived randomly or in response to a distress signal. They had jumped directly into attack positions that could only have been calculated by someone with intimate knowledge of Zephyrian tactical doctrine and current fleet positioning. Impossible coordination, Sub-Admiral Traina whispered. They knew exactly where to position themselves for maximum tactical advantage. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "receiving transmission from the human fleet commander." The main view screen shimmered as Admiral Hayes appeared, his weathered face grim with determination. Jake recognized him immediately from intelligence. Briefings, one of the most experienced tactical commanders in the human fleet, known for his ability to achieve victory against superior odds through careful planning and precise execution. "Admiral Kethvar," Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who held the tactical advantage, "I am Admiral Ryan Hayes of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are ordered to withdraw from this system immediately." Kethvar forced himself to project confidence, despite the growing dread in his chest. "Admiral Hayes, you face 12 battlecruisers with a single squadron. Your position is hopeless." "I think you'll find our intelligence on your capabilities is more accurate than your intelligence on ours," Hayes replied. "We know about your shield harmonics, your formation vulnerabilities, and your current tactical disposition. Withdraw now, or face the consequences." The casual mention of shield harmonics sent a chill through every Zephyrian officer on the bridge. That information was classified at the highest levels of military security. The only way humans could possess such detailed intelligence was if they had access to current operational data from active Zephyrian warships. Commander Veltak was frantically analyzing communication intercepts from the human fleet. What he discovered made his blood freeze. "Admiral, the human ships are transmitting tactical data on our exact shield frequencies, weapon ranges, and formation patterns. Their targeting computers have precise information on every ship in our fleet." Kethavar's eyes snapped to Jake's. "Sell." The human prisoner remained motionless. But there was something different about his posture now, a subtle relaxation that suggested satisfaction with the way events were unfolding. "You!" Kethavar snarled, approaching the transparent barrier. "How did you transmit intelligence to your fleet? We monitored all communications. No signals left this ship." Jake opened his eyes and looked directly at the Zephyrian admiral. "When?" He spoke. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if explaining something obvious to a slow student. "I didn't need to transmit anything. Admiral Hayes is a tactical genius who understands human strategic doctrine. He knew that any surviving officer would gather intelligence on enemy capabilities. He calculated arrival times, formation vulnerabilities, and optimal attack vectors based on the assumption that I would provide targeting data when rescue became possible." "But you never communicated with your fleet," Traina protested. "I didn't need to. Admiral Hayes positioned his ships to take advantage of the shield frequency data I would have gathered during 12 hours of observation. He assumed I would identify your formation change protocols and predict the optimal moment for attack. His calculations were based on what a human strategic analyst could accomplish with extended access to enemy tactical information. Kethvar felt the full weight of his mistake crashing down on him. By keeping Jake on the bridge during active operations, he had given a human intelligence specialist 12 hours of uninterrupted access to classified military information. Jake had not needed to communicate with his rescuers because Admiral Hayes had anticipated exactly what intelligence would be available and planned his attack accordingly. "Sir," the tactical officer called out urgently, "human ships are moving into firing positions. They're targeting our shield generators with surgical precision." On the main display, the human fleet was executing a coordinated maneuver that exploited every weakness in the Zephyrian formation. Each ship had been assigned specific targets based on detailed knowledge of Zephyrian shield harmonics and defensive protocols. The attack pattern was so precisely calculated that it would create a cascade failure in the defensive network within minutes. "Admiral," Hayes's voice came from the communication channel, "you have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal from this system. After that, we will demonstrate that human tactical capabilities are more advanced than your intelligence reports. Suggest." Kethvar looked around his bridge at officers who were staring at their displays with expressions of growing panic. The human fleet was smaller than his own, but they held every tactical advantage. They knew his ship positions, his defensive capabilities, his formation doctrine, and his operational limitations. Fighting them would be like engaging an enemy who could predict every move before it was made. "Admiral," Commander Veltok said quietly, "recommend immediate withdrawal. The humans have comprehensive intelligence on our fleet capabilities. Engaging them under these circumstances would result in significant casualties with minimal probability of success." "Sir," Traina added, "if the humans can coordinate this level of tactical precision with a single prisoner providing intelligence, their fleet combat capabilities may be far more advanced than our strategic assessments indicated." Kethvar stared at Jake Morrison, who had returned to his meditative posture but was now watching the proceedings with obvious interest. The human had turned 12 hours of apparent captivity into the most devastating intelligence coup in modern military history. He had analyzed an entire enemy fleet, predicted their tactical responses, and provided his own forces with the information needed to achieve tactical superiority. 20 seconds, Admiral," Hayes announced. The Zephyrian fleet was trapped in a tactical nightmare. Their standard formations had been compromised, their defensive protocols were known to the enemy, and their shield frequencies had been mapped with scientific precision. Worse, the humans had demonstrated a level of strategic coordination that suggested their military capabilities had been severely underestimated. "All ships," Kethvar ordered through gritted teeth, "prepare for immediate withdrawal from the system." "Sir," the navigation officer asked, "what about the prisoner?" Kethvar looked at Jake one final time. The human had achieved something that should have been impossible, turning capture and imprisonment into a strategic victory that saved an entire colony world. He had demonstrated patience, intelligence, and tactical sophistication that challenged every assumption about human military capabilities. "Transport him to the human flagship," Kethvar ordered. "Immediately." Within minutes, Jake Morrison was aboard Admiral Hayes's ship, providing detailed tactical intelligence on the Zephyrian fleet. The information he had gathered during his 12 hours of observation would reshape human understanding of their enemies and provide strategic advantages for years to come. The Zephyrian fleet withdrew from the Kepler 442 system in perfect formation, their retreat watched by 50,000 grateful colonists on New Eden. Admiral Kethvar spent the journey back to Zephyrian space composing a report that would fundamentally alter his species' assessment of human military capabilities. Recommended. Classification change, he wrote in his final summary. Humans should be reclassified from primitive species with limited tactical capabilities to extreme strategic threat requiring maximum caution. Their ability to conduct intelligence analysis under adverse conditions and coordinate fleet operations with minimal communication suggests military sophistication far beyond current estimates. He paused in his writing to consider Jake Morrison's 12 hours of perfect stillness, followed by a single whispered sentence that had revealed the depth of human strategic thinking. The image would haunt his dreams for years to come. Additional recommendation, Kethvar continued. All future operations involving human forces should assume comprehensive enemy intelligence on our tactical doctrine and capabilities. Their strategic patience and analytical abilities represent a form of warfare we are not prepared to counter. Jake Morrison had spent 12 hours in silent meditation and spoken one sentence. In doing so, he had saved 50,000 lives, provided his fleet with decisive tactical advantage, and established humanity's reputation as a species that should never be underestimated. The human didn't speak for 12 hours, then whispered one sentence that caused a fleet-wide retreat. But more importantly, he had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any arsenal was simply the ability to listen, learn, and wait for the perfect moment to act. Admiral Hayes would later write in his own report that Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had conducted the most successful intelligence operation in human military history without leaving his cell. 12 hours. Jake had been sitting in perfect stillness for exactly 12 hours, listening to every word spoken on the bridge of the dominant will. The Zephyrian crew had long since stopped paying attention to their silent prisoner, treating him as just another piece of equipment occupying space in their tactical center. Governor Patricia Lang had finally transmitted New Eden's formal surrender 23 minutes ago. The document had been carefully worded to buy maximum time, filled with requests for clarification and procedural questions that would delay the Zephyrian response. But Admiral Kethvar had grown impatient with human stalling tactics and issued his final ultimatum. The planet had 15 minutes to accept unconditional surrender or face orbital bombardment of civilian targets. Jake listened to the countdown, timer on the bridge display, and made his final calculations. Everything had to happen in perfect sequence now. Governor Lang would accept surrender with exactly 4 minutes remaining on the deadline. He was certain of this because he had read her psychological profile during his time on the Liberty's edge. She would sacrifice her pride to save civilian lives, but she would use every second available to her first. That would trigger the Zephyrian formation change from siege pattern to occupation configuration. The heavy cruisers would maintain orbital positions while the lighter ships moved to landing approach vectors. During the transition, the interlocking shield network would experience a 17-second vulnerability window when all vessels were exposed to coordinated attack. Admiral Hayes and the Third Fleet would arrive in the system at exactly that moment, if Jake's calculations were correct. But Hayes would need to know where to strike and when to attack. He would need tactical intelligence that only Jake could provide. The bridge chronometer showed 14 minutes until the bombardment deadline. Jake opened his eyes. The movement was so unexpected after 12 hours of absolute stillness that several nearby crew members actually jumped in surprise. Sub-Admiral Trena was the first to notice, alerting Admiral Kethvar with a sharp intake of breath. "Admiral, the human prisoner is showing signs of awareness." Kethvar turned from the main tactical display where he had been monitoring the final surrender negotiations. He approached Jake's cell with the casual confidence of a predator examining wounded prey. After 12 hours of silence, he expected to finally hear the pleading and desperation that marked a broken enemy. "So," Kethvar said, his voice carrying the cold amusement of complete victory, "the human finally awakens from his primitive trance. Do you wish to beg for mercy before we claim your colony world?" Jake looked directly at the Zephyrian admiral, his expression calm and focused. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the suddenly quiet bridge with perfect clarity. 37 minutes ago, I counted your 7th ship moving into formation Echo 7. You should have kept them in defensive pattern Theta 9. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Admiral Kethvar felt a cold chill run down his spine, though he could not immediately understand why. The human statement seemed like meaningless tactical gibberish, but there was something in his tone that made the admiral's blood freeze. Not fear or desperation, but the quiet confidence of someone who had just revealed they knew far more than they should. "What did you say?" Kethvar demanded, his voice sharp with sudden uncertainty. But Jake had already closed his eyes again, returning to his meditative state as if the brief exchange had never happened. His breathing remained steady and controlled, his vital signs showed no stress indicators, and his expression returned to the same peaceful calm he had maintained for 12 hours. Commander Veltak rushed to his sensor station, frantically checking the tactical recordings. "Admiral, he is referring to the ZNS Retribution's position change 37 minutes ago. Ship 7 in our formation order did move from defensive pattern Theta 9 to formation Echo 7 at exactly that time." "How could he possibly know our formation designations?" Sub-Admiral Traina asked, her voice tight with growing alarm. "Those are classified tactical codes." Admiral Kethvar stared at the motionless figure in the transparent cell, his mind racing through the implications. Formation Echo 7 was a standard approach pattern used during occupation operations. Pattern Theta 9 was defensive positioning for extended siege operations. The human somehow knew not only their current tactical arrangements, but also their tactical doctrine and formation nomenclature. "He has been listening," Veltak said quietly. "For 12 hours, he has been absorbing every conversation, every status report, every tactical discussion on this bridge. We thought he was in shock, but he was actually conducting intelligence analysis." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems and the distant sounds of the fleet maintaining orbit around New Eden. Every officer present was beginning to understand the horrifying truth. They had been discussing classified military information in front of a human intelligence specialist for half a day. "Impossible!" Kethvar snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "No primitive species could process that level of tactical information." "Admiral," the communications officer called out from his station, "incoming transmission from planetary government. Governor Lang is accepting our surrender terms." The message played across the bridge speakers in Governor Lang's tired but dignified voice. "The government of New Eden accepts the surrender terms as stated. We request immediate cessation of hostile action against our orbital facilities and civilian population centers." Kethvar barely heard the surrender message. His attention was focused entirely on the implications of Jake's whispered statement. The human had somehow identified their formation change procedures, predicted the timing of the surrender, and demonstrated knowledge of Zephyrian tactical doctrine that should have been impossible for any alien species to possess. "Sir," Traina said quietly, What are your orders regarding formation transition? The standard procedure was clear. Shift from siege configuration to occupation pattern immediately upon receiving formal surrender. But Jake's comment about Formation Echo 7 suggested he understood their tactical intentions with disturbing accuracy. Had he somehow predicted their next move as well? Admiral, the tactical officer reported. Fleet is requesting permission to transition to occupation formation. Kethavar hesitated, staring at the silent human in the cell. Everything about this situation felt wrong. Jake's unnatural calm, his impossible knowledge of their operations, his confident prediction about ship movements, it all suggested a level of strategic sophistication that their intelligence report said humans did not possess. Hold formation, Kethavar ordered. Maintain siege configuration until further notice. Sir, Traina questioned, standard doctrine requires immediate transition to occupation pattern following enemy surrender. I am aware of doctrine, Kethavar snapped, but something is not right about this situation. The human knows too much. Jake remained motionless in his cell, but Admiral Kethavar thought he detected the faintest trace of a smile on the prisoner's lips. The expression was gone so quickly that it might have been imagination, but it sent another chill through the Zephyrian commander. Commander Veltak was running detailed analysis on the bridge's security recordings, checking every conversation and status report from the past 12 hours. What he found made his hands shake as he compiled the data. Admiral, Veltak reported, his voice barely controlled. Preliminary analysis confirms that this human had access to complete intelligence on our fleet composition, formation doctrine, shield harmonics, communication protocols, and tactical procedures. If he was actually processing this information instead of simply listening, then he knows everything, Kethavar finished grimly. Ship positions, weapon capabilities, defensive arrangements, operational schedules, everything. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. They were all beginning to understand that their casual discussions had given away military secrets that could compromise not just this operation, but the entire Zephyrian war effort. If the human somehow managed to transmit this information to his own forces, Sir, the sensor operator called out urgently, detecting massive gravitational distortions at the edge of the system, multiple large contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Admiral, Kethavar felt his stomach drop as the tactical display updated to show 16 new contacts materializing in perfect attack formation at the system's edge. The energy signatures were unmistakably human, but the coordination and timing of their arrival was impossible unless... He knew they were coming, Kethavar whispered, staring at Jake's motionless form. Somehow, he knew exactly when they would arrive. The human Third Fleet had entered the Kepler 442 system at precisely the moment when the Zephyrian formation would have been most vulnerable if they had followed standard doctrine. Only Admiral Kethavar's last-minute decision to hold position had prevented a catastrophic tactical surprise. Jake Morrison had not just been gathering intelligence for 12 hours. He had been calculating the optimal. To anyone watching, Jake Morrison appeared to be a broken man, lost in catatonic shock. He sat motionless in his transparent prison, eyes closed, breathing steady, showing no reaction to the systematic destruction of human defenses playing out on the bridge's main view screen. The Zephyrian crew had grown accustomed to his presence, treating him like a piece of furniture that happened to occupy space on their bridge. They had no idea that behind those closed eyes, one of the most sophisticated tactical minds in the human military was working at full capacity. Jake had spent 10 years as a strategic analyst before taking command of the Liberty's Edge. His specialty was pattern recognition and tactical assessment, the ability to look at seemingly random data and find the underlying structure that revealed an enemy's weaknesses. The Zephyrians had unknowingly given him the greatest intelligence opportunity in human history. For 8 hours now, he had been listening to every conversation, every status report, every casual comment made by the bridge crew. His trained memory was cataloging ship positions, weapon configurations, shield frequencies, crew rotations, and communication protocols. More importantly, he was beginning to understand the fundamental weaknesses in Zephyrian tactical doctrine. The first weakness was their arrogance. Admiral Kethvar and his officers discussed classified information openly in front of their prisoner, never considering that a primitive human might possess the intelligence to understand and exploit what he heard. They treated Jake like a wild animal in a cage, present but irrelevant to their operations. The second weakness was their rigid adherence to standard formations. Jake had identified at least 6 different tactical patterns that the Zephyrian fleet followed with mechanical precision. They were disciplined and effective, but they were also predictable. A strategist who understood their formations could anticipate their movements and position forces to exploit temporary vulnerabilities. The third weakness was the most critical, and Jake had only discovered it 3 hours ago when Sub-Admiral Trey Na had discussed shield harmonics with the fleet's chief engineer. The Zephyrian ships used an interlocking defensive network that made their combined shields nearly impenetrable. But the system had a fatal flaw. During formation changes, there was a brief window when the shield frequencies had to realign. For approximately 17 seconds, the entire fleet would be vulnerable to coordinated attack. Jake filed this information away and continued his analysis. The Zephyrians were currently in siege formation around New Eden with their heavy cruisers, arranged in a defensive sphere while the dreadnoughts maintained bombardment positions. If they followed standard doctrine, they would maintain this formation until the planet surrendered, then shift to Occupation Pattern 7 to begin landing operations. The formation change would happen exactly 43 minutes after New Eden's government officially surrendered. Jake had confirmed this timing by listening to similar operations discussed during the flight to Kepler 442. The Zephyrians were creatures of habit, following the same tactical procedures that had brought them victory across dozens of star systems. But Jake knew something the Zephyrians didn't. Admiral Ryan Hayes and the human Third Fleet had been conducting training exercises in the Ross 128 system, only 6 light-years from New Eden. If Hayes had received Captain Barrett's distress signal and responded immediately, his ships would arrive in the Kepler 442 system in approximately 4 hours. The timing would be perfect if Jake's calculations were correct. The human fleet would arrive just as the Zephyrians were shifting to occupation formation, catching them during their 17-second vulnerability window. But only if Hayes understood exactly when and where to strike. Jake opened his eyes for just a moment, glancing at the chronometer display on the bridge. Then he closed them again and continued his meditation, adjusting his calculations based on the latest tactical reports flowing across the bridge. The Zephyrians had accelerated their bombardment schedule slightly, which meant the surrender demand would go out 37 minutes earlier than originally planned. Commander Veltak paused near Jake's cell during his regular psychological assessment rounds. The Zephyrian intelligence officer had been studying the human prisoner with growing fascination over the past several hours. Still no response to external stimuli, Veltak reported to Admiral Kethvar, but I am detecting some interesting neurological patterns. His brain activity suggests complex mathematical processing, far more sophisticated than we would expect from a species at humanity's technological level. Perhaps he is counting the hours until his death, Kethvar suggested dismissively. I don't think so, Admiral. The patterns are too structured, too purposeful. If I didn't know better, I would say he is performing some kind of strategic analysis. Kethvar laughed harshly. Strategic analysis? He is a prisoner with no access to information and no ability to communicate with his forces. What could he possibly analyze? Veltok had no answer for that, but his unease continued to grow. There was something about the humans' behavior that defied all their psychological models. Most prisoners showed deterioration over time, increasing stress, despair, or rage as their situation became hopeless. But Jake Morrison seemed to become more focused and controlled with each passing hour. On the main view screen, New Eden's last defense installation finally went dark. Captain Barrett's orbital station had fought for nearly 10 hours, but her crew could no longer maintain even basic life support. The planet below was completely defenseless, its 50,000 colonists at the mercy of the Zephyrian fleet. Excellent work, Admiral Kethvar announced to his bridge crew. Prepare the surrender demand for transmission to the planetary government. Standard terms: complete capitulation within 2 hours or we begin bombing civilian population centers. Jake listened to the surrender demand being composed and transmitted, each word confirming his tactical analysis. The Zephyrians were following their standard siege protocol exactly as he had predicted. They would give the humans 2 hours to consider their options, then begin the occupation sequence if surrender was not forthcoming. The colonists of New Eden had no choice but to surrender. They had no weapons, no defenses, and no hope of rescue. Or so the Zephyrians believed. Admiral Kethvar was confident that the human government would capitulate within the hour, allowing him to begin landing operations ahead of schedule. But Jake knew that New Eden's governor, Patricia Lang, was a former military officer who understood the importance of buying time. She would stretch the surrender negotiations as long as possible, hoping against hope that help might arrive. Her delaying tactics would keep the Zephyrian fleet in siege formation for exactly the right amount of time. As the hours passed, Jake refined his calculations with each new piece of information. Crew rotation schedules, fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, shield generator efficiency, all of it was being processed and analyzed by his strategic training. He was building a complete tactical picture of the Zephyrian fleet, identifying not just their capabilities but their limitations. The Zephyrians had been fighting inferior opponents for so long that they had become complacent. Their formations were designed to maximize intimidation rather than defensive efficiency. Their communication protocols were standardized across the entire fleet, making them vulnerable to coordinated disruption. Most critically, their shield network required precise timing and positioning to maintain its effectiveness. Jake had identified 17 different ways to exploit these weaknesses, but only one scenario offered the possibility of complete victory rather than mere survival. The human Third Fleet would need to arrive at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right formation, targeting exactly the right ships to create a cascade failure in the Zephyrian defensive network. The probability of success was less than 12% under normal circumstances. But Jake was counting on Admiral Hayes to make one critical assumption, that any surviving human officer would try to gather intelligence on enemy capabilities and transmit that information if rescue became possible. Hayes would expect to receive tactical data, and he would position his fleet to take advantage of any weaknesses Jake had discovered. 8 hours into his captivity, Jake had memorized the complete technical specifications of 12 Zephyrian warships, mapped their communication networks, analyzed their tactical doctrines, and calculated the optimal attack pattern for a human fleet that didn't even know it was coming to fight. Now all he had to do was wait for the perfect moment to share that information. The Zephyrians continued their siege operations, unaware that their prisoner had spent the time conducting the most comprehensive intelligence analysis in human military history. They saw a broken soldier in meditation, but they had actually captured a strategic weapon that was about to turn their certain victory into devastating defeat. Admiral Kethvar stood before the main view screen, watching New Eden rotate slowly beneath his fleet. In a few more hours, this planet would join the Zephyrian Empire, and his reputation would be enhanced by another easy conquest. He had no reason to suspect that everything was about to change. In his transparent cell, Jake Morrison continued his calculations and prepared to speak his first words in 12 hours. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system like a pack of predators surrounding wounded prey. 12 massive warships materialized in perfect formation, their dark hulls absorbing the light from the distant star. At the center of the formation, the dominant will led the advance toward the third planet where 50,000 human colonists lived their quiet lives, unaware that death had just arrived in their system. Jake felt the subtle shift in the ship's engines as they transitioned from hyperspace to normal flight. His eyes remained closed, his breathing steady and controlled, but every sense was focused on the activity around him on the bridge. Through the constant chatter of status reports and tactical updates, he was building a complete picture of the Zephyrian fleet's capabilities and formation. Captain Lisa Barrett was having the worst day of her military career. The commander of New Eden's orbital defense station watched her tactical display with growing horror as 12 massive contacts appeared on her sensors. Each one was easily 5 times the size of her station, and the energy readings from their weapon systems made her stomach clench with fear. "Communications. Get me Admiral Hayes at Fleet Command," she ordered, though she knew help was days away, at best. "Priority Alpha transmission. Ma'am, at this distance it will take 47 hours for our message to reach Earth," her communications officer replied. Lisa stared at the advancing fleet on her display. 47 hours. The Zephyrians would be finished with whatever they planned to do long before Earth even knew New Eden was under attack. Her station had 2 plasma cannons and a handful of defensive missiles. The 2 patrol frigates, USS Hartford and USS Camden, were already moving to intercept, but they were designed for customs enforcement, not fleet combat. Admiral Kethvar stood before the main view screen on the dominant Will's bridge, watching the blue and green planet grow larger as they approached. New Eden was a beautiful world, with vast oceans and 3 large continents covered in the green of Earth-based vegetation. Human colonists had been terraforming this planet for nearly 30 years, turning it into a second Earth, far from their crowded homeworld. Sub-Admiral Traina reported from her station. "We are detecting 2 small human warships moving to intercept us. Each vessel displaces approximately 8,000 tons. Kethvar allowed himself a small smile. 8,000 tons. His smallest escort ships were 3 times that size, and his dreadnought displaced over 2 million tons. The humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Perhaps both. Also detecting 1 orbital station above the planet, Trana continued. Minimal defensive capabilities. Estimated armament consists of 2 medium plasma cannons and conventional missile systems. Open a channel to the human defenders, Kethvar ordered. Let us see if they possess the wisdom to surrender without forcing us to demonstrate our superiority. In his transparent cell, Jake continued his meditation while absorbing every detail of the conversation. 2 frigates and 1 orbital station against 12 dreadnoughts. The colonists of New Eden had no chance in a direct fight, but Jake knew that human military doctrine had never relied solely on matching enemy firepower. Sometimes the smallest force could achieve victory through superior tactics and timing. The main view screen shimmered as the communication channel opened. Captain Barrett's face appeared, her expression grim but determined. Jake recognized the look. He had seen it in the mirror many times during his own career. It was the face of a soldier who knew the odds were impossible, but refused to give. "Up anyway. This is Captain Lisa Barrett commanding New Eden Defense Station," she said. "You are in violation of human colonial authority space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Admiral Kethvar laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Captain Barrett, I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. You face 12 battlecruisers with a combined firepower capable of sterilizing your entire planet. I suggest you consider the wisdom of surrender." "We will never surrender to alien invaders," Barrett replied. "New Eden will defend itself. Then you will die with honor, which is more than most humans deserve," Kethvar said. He cut the communication channel and turned to his tactical officer. "Begin the siege protocol. Destroy their military assets but leave the civilian population centers intact. We want survivors to spread word of Zephyrian power." The first engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Jake listened to the tactical reports as they flowed across the bridge, each one building his understanding of Zephyrian combat doctrine. The USS Hartford tried to engage the lead escort ship with everything she had, but her plasma cannons barely scratched the alien vessel's shields. Return fire from a single Zephyrian gun turret vaporized the frigate in a brilliant flash of superheated metal and atmosphere. The USS Camden lasted slightly longer, using the debris field from her sister ship as cover while she launched her entire missile inventory at the enemy formation. The Zephyrian point defense systems tracked and destroyed every incoming missile with casual efficiency. A second volley from the escort ships reduced the Camden to expanding gas and twisted metal. Captain Barrett's defense station proved more durable than the frigates, but only because Admiral Kethvar wanted to use it for target practice. Instead of destroying it outright, he ordered his ships to take turns bombarding different sections of the station, systematically stripping away its defenses piece by piece. Barrett and her crew fought back with desperate courage, but their weapons could not penetrate even the lightest Zephyrian shields. "Excellent training exercise," Kethvar commented as he watched another section of the human station explode under concentrated fire. "Our newest crew members are gaining valuable experience against live targets." Jake felt a cold anger building in his chest as he listened to the casual destruction of human lives, but he forced himself to remain calm and focused. Emotion would not help the colonists of New Eden. Only information and careful planning could turn this disaster into an opportunity. The siege continued for hours as the Zephyrian fleet moved into orbit around New Eden. They destroyed every satellite, every communication relay, every piece of military equipment on the planet's surface. The colonists were effectively blind and defenseless, cut off from each other and from any hope of outside assistance. During this time, various Zephyrian officers visited Jake's cell, drawn by curiosity about the silent human prisoner. Commander. Veltok, the fleet's intelligence officer, spent nearly an hour studying Jake's vital signs and behavioral patterns. Fascinating, Veltok murmured to his aide. Most captured enemies show significant psychological deterioration within the first few hours. Panic, despair, anger, pleading. These are normal responses to helplessness, but this human shows none of these reactions. Perhaps humans lack the emotional capacity for proper fear responses, the aide suggested. No, Veltok said thoughtfully. I have studied human psychology extensively. They are actually more emotional than most species, which makes their military effectiveness somewhat surprising. This individual is deliberately controlling his responses through some form of mental discipline. Sub-Admiral Traina paused near the cell during one of her routine inspections of bridge operations. She watched Jake's perfectly still form for several minutes, noting the way his breathing remained steady and controlled, despite the sounds of destruction echoing through the bridge speakers. "Admiral," she said quietly to Kethvar, "there is something unusual about this human. His level of mental control is beyond anything in our psychological profiles of the species." Kethvar glanced at the motionless figure in the cell. "He is in shock. His primitive mind cannot process the reality of his situation." "I disagree, sir. Shocked individuals show specific neurological responses. Elevated brain activity in stress centers, irregular vital signs, involuntary muscle tension. This human shows none of these indicators. If anything, his brain activity suggests he is in a state of heightened focus and awareness." "Irrelevant," Kethvar dismissed. "One human cannot affect the outcome of this operation." But as the hours passed and Jake remained in his unchanging meditation, more and more of the bridge crew began to take notice. There was something deeply unsettling about his absolute stillness, his apparent indifference to the destruction happening around him. Some of the younger officers began to whisper among themselves about the unnatural calm of the human prisoner. The tactical display showed New Eden's defenses crumbling under the systematic Zephyrian assault. Defense Station Alpha, Captain Barrett's command, was down to emergency power and had lost all offensive capability. The planet's surface installations were dark and silent. The colonists huddled in their homes and shelters, waiting for the end to come. Admiral Kethvar prepared to send the final surrender demand to the planet's civilian government. In a few more hours, New Eden would join the growing list of human worlds under Zephyrian control. Another victory for the Empire, another demonstration of their overwhelming military superiority. In his cell, Jake Morrison continued to listen and learn, absorbing every detail of Zephyrian tactics and capabilities. The enemy thought they had. The explosion threw Jake Morrison against the bulkhead of his escape pod with enough force to crack 2 ribs. The USS Liberty's edge was gone, reduced to glowing debris scattered across the dark void of space. Through the small porthole, he watched. The pieces of his ship tumble slowly in the vacuum, each fragment catching the distant light of the system's twin suns. Jake pressed his hand against his side where the ribs had cracked and tried to focus on his breathing. The pod's life support systems hummed quietly around him, designed to keep one person alive for 72 hours maximum. He had been drifting for 6 hours already when the massive shadow fell across his viewport. The Zephyrian dreadnought was bigger than anything Jake had ever seen. The ship stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, its dark hull bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. The human fleet had intelligence reports about these vessels, but seeing one up close made Jake's stomach tighten. No wonder the Liberty's Edge had lasted less than 10 minutes in the fight. A tractor beam locked onto his pod with a gentle but irresistible pull. Jake watched as the massive ship grew larger in his viewport until he could see individual details on its hull. Gun ports the size of subway tunnels, armor plating thick enough to walk on, shield generators that hummed with barely contained energy. This was a ship built for conquest, designed to break the will of entire worlds. The docking bay that swallowed his escape pod was vast enough to hold a dozen human frigates. Jake felt the soft thump as his pod was set down on the deck, followed by the hiss of atmosphere being pumped into the bay. Through his viewport, he could see them waiting for him. The Zephyrians were tall, nearly 8 feet on average, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the harsh lights of the docking bay. Their faces were angular, almost predatory, with large dark eyes that missed nothing. They wore black uniforms that seemed to absorb light, making them appear as moving shadows against the metal deck. The pod's hatch cycled open with a pneumatic hiss. Jake climbed out slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements careful. The gravity on the Zephyrian ship was heavier than Earth standard, making each step feel like he was carrying an extra 30 pounds. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward from the group of waiting aliens. Jake recognized him from the intelligence briefings. The pale scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, the ceremonial armor that marked him as fleet commander, the way the other Zephyrians deferred to his presence. This was the alien who had destroyed 3 human colonies in the past year. "Human," Kethvar said in accented but clear English. "You are the sole survivor of your vessel." Jake said nothing. He had already decided during the 6 hours in the escape pod that silence would be his only weapon here. The Zephyrians expected humans to beg, to plead, to show fear. They used psychological warfare as effectively as their plasma cannons. But Jake had learned something during his years in the military that most people never understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was nothing at all. Kethvar waited for a response that never came. His dark eyes studied Jake's face, looking for signs of the terror that usually marked captured enemies. Instead, he found only calm attention, as if Jake was simply observing an interesting conversation between strangers. "You will be taken to the bridge," Kethvar continued. "You will witness the power of the Zephyrian Empire as we claim another human world." Still, Jake remained silent. He followed the guards who flanked him through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. The walls were dark metal, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the harsh lighting. Every surface was angular, aggressive, built to remind visitors that they were inside a weapon of war. The bridge of the dominant will was a cathedral of destruction. The main view screen dominated the far wall, currently showing the tactical display of the Zephyrian fleet. 12 massive warships hung in formation, each one capable of reducing a planet to ash. Officer stations surrounded the command center, each one manned by a Zephyrian specialist monitoring some aspect of the fleet's operations. In the center of the bridge stood a transparent holding cell, roughly 10 feet square. It was positioned so that anyone inside would have a perfect view of everything that happened on the bridge. Jake understood immediately. This was not just a prison, it was a theater. The Zephyrians wanted their captives to watch, to see the futility of resistance against their military might. The guards gestured for Jake to enter the cell. The moment he stepped inside, an energy field shimmered into existence across the opening. The air inside felt slightly different, charged with the same energy that powered the containment field. Jake could hear everything happening on the bridge, as clearly as if he were standing among the officers. Admiral Cathvar approached the cell, his reflection distorted in the energy field that separated them. "Your silence is curious, human. Most species beg for their lives at this point." Jake settled into a cross-legged position on the floor of the cell. He closed his eyes and began to regulate his breathing, falling into the meditation techniques he had learned during his military training. The Zephyrians might think he was showing weakness or retreating into shock, but Jake had a different purpose in mind. "Fascinating," Cathvar murmured to his second-in-command, a female Zephyrian named Sub-Admiral Traina. "Perhaps humans lack the intelligence to understand their situation." Traina studied the motionless figure in the cell. "Admiral, his vital signs are remarkably stable. Most captured enemies show elevated stress responses, increased heart rate, irregular breathing, stress hormones. This human shows none of these indicators." "A primitive nervous system, perhaps," Cathvar suggested, "or simply too stupid to be afraid." Around them, the bridge continued its normal operations. Navigation officers plotted jump coordinates to the next target system. Weapons specialists ran diagnostics on the fleet's massive guns. Communications operators maintained contact with the other ships in the formation. And through it all, Jake sat perfectly still in his transparent prison, apparently oblivious to everything around him. But Jake was listening to every word, cataloging every piece of information that filtered through the bridge chatter. Ship positions, weapon status, crew rotations, tactical formations, all of it was being absorbed and filed away in his trained memory. The Zephyrians thought they had captured a simple soldier, but Jake Morrison had spent 10 years as a strategic analyst before taking command of the Liberty's Edge. He understood that information was often more valuable than weapons. Hours passed. The Zephyrian fleet prepared to jump to their next target, following the careful choreography of military precision. Officers called out status reports, coordinates were verified, and jump calculations were completed. And through it all, the human prisoner sat in perfect stillness, as motionless as a statue. Admiral Cathvar found himself glancing at the cell more frequently as time went on. There was something unsettling about the human's absolute calm. Even seasoned Zephyrian warriors showed some signs of stress in combat situations, but this primitive alien seemed to have achieved a level of mental control that bordered on the unnatural. "Set course for the Kepler 442 system," Cathvar ordered. "The human colony of New Eden awaits our arrival." The jump to hyperspace engaged with a barely perceptible shudder through the massive ship. In his cell, Jake Morrison continued his meditation, storing away every detail of the Zephyrian fleet's capabilities and preparing for what he knew would be a very long wait.